Okay, so on Laulima in the daily work, you can click on the HTML file that is for today's date, the 11th, and there's just those things listed. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go over exam 1. Okay, so hopefully you're already logged into Laulima, because if you go to Laulima and you go to resources, and then from the resources, you go to the exam study guides folder. There's now a folder exam 1. Okay, a couple people didn't take exam 1, but they can't see this folder because I set it up so everybody except the people that didn't take it can see it. And so there's this PDF file which has the answers to the exam. Okay, so you want to open that up and take a look at it because it's going to certainly be easier to read that on your screens than up on the overhead. Okay, so, but let's go over this. 2 main steps for normalizing data for a database. Okay, the 2 main steps. First, you create a separate table for each different entity associated with the data. Second, you make sure that all the fields for all of the tables are atomic. They cannot be broken up any further. And those are the 2 main things. That covers up to normalization level 3. So 1, 2, and 3 are covered if you just do those 2 things. In practice, that's what you shoot for. Okay, there are higher levels of normalization that are possible. In practice, nobody ever really does that. Okay. Or there might be some special cases, but in general, no one does that. Okay, any questions on number 1? Okay, one of the problems that I see in general on the essay questions is some people are just restating the question. You're not going to get any points for that. So make sure you answer the question directly. Okay, number 2, briefly explain role of SQL scripts in setting up a new database. Okay, so not migrating to another database, but setting up a new database, and then briefly explain, I should have said why Python scripts can be useful in moving existing data from one database to another. Okay, so in setting up a new database, the SQL scripts are used to basically create the tables, and this allows to make it easy to redesign because you can just run the SQL script again to change the design of the tables. Anything along the lines of like creating the tables, setting up the tables, that basically is what I was looking for the new database. Some people also put down you can use the SQL scripts to insert some test data into the new database. That's also a good answer. Okay. Second part, Python scripts can be used to take existing data and write SQL scripts for inserting into the new database or the other database you want to insert it into. Some people explain how this is better than actually writing out the SQL scripts manually, and that's again a very good way to put it. Okay, so that's a good answer if that's what you put. Okay, any questions on number 2? Okay, then let's look at number 3. When creating a database view, what role do foreign key constraints play? So when you're creating the view, okay, so some people answered this question, what are foreign key constraints for? And so they basically prevent you from inserting data that's supposed to depend on another table and it doesn't exist already in that table. And that's true, but that's not really answering the question. The question is asking what role do they play when creating a database view? Okay, but I let it go because that was a good answer, so I didn't take off points for that. Okay, but strictly speaking, that's not answering the question. Okay, in the second part, what is the main reason for creating a database view? Okay, so the first part, the foreign key constraints, they're used basically to join the tables together in the view. Okay, specifically they're used for specifying the matching condition to join those tables. Okay, and then the main reason for creating it is to join more than one table, so you can view data from more than one table at a time more easily. Okay? Any questions on number 3? Okay, number 4. When you write SQL script to initialize the tables, what is the purpose for dropping any existing tables? Okay, main reason is to allow easy redesign, right? You can change the field names, you can change the field types, you can add fields, you can remove fields. Very simple to redesign the table definition. And when you create it, what do you need to specify? You need to specify the data type, right? So if I put first name, text, if I put price, numeric, 4,2 or something, you need to say what the data type is. Okay, any questions on number 4? Okay, so I was hoping with those assessment quizzes, people would do better on the essay parts. Not clear whether that worked or not. Okay, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Okay, some people did very well on those. So. Okay, consider the following unnormalized data for a simple bookstore. You have customers, you have books, okay, and then you're probably going to need some kind of table like sales, right, to connect together customers with books. This is actually one of the examples that's in the online material. Okay, it's not the same data, but it's the same example. Okay, so it says normalize the data. So first come up with init.sql. Okay, these first 3 drop statements, if you did not put them in, I didn't take off any points for that, because strictly speaking, it's not necessary. If all your create table statements are all correct, then you don't really need to drop anything. But if you did put it in, that's good. Okay? But if you didn't, I didn't count off any points for that. Okay, so I decided to create my books table first. Okay, all of the tables should have started off with an ID field, and the data type is serial. Okay, that's shorthand for making it an integer, not null, and basically a default value that refers to a sequence that's going to be created. Okay, so very easy, just put serial. I got title, author, and price. Title and author are text, and the price I put numeric 6,2, but if you put 4,2 or even 3,2, that's still correct. If you put 1,2, then I took off half a point, because then you can't really store any prices with a width of only 1. Okay, second table, customers. Okay, once again, ID serial. Okay, it's a very good bet that if you're creating a table for an exam question, it's going to start off with an ID field that's serial. Okay, that's kind of a given. That's the best way to start. First name and last name are both text. Okay, primary key for pretty much every table we're going to use is going to be just the ID field. Okay, because that's the one that's guaranteed to be unique. Okay, the sales, here's the very important foreign key constraints that are being generated as a result of the definition of this table. Okay, so book ID, this name, you can choose whatever you want, but it's a good idea to remind you that it basically has to match the ID field in the books table. And then here's customer ID, okay, which has to match the ID field from the customers table. That's a really important relationship there. Okay, so any questions on the init.sql part? Okay, so relatively straightforward from what we have done. If you couldn't quite remember those things on the exam, you'll get other opportunities on later exams to do similar kind of thing. Okay, so if it's relatively new to you folks at this point, and so you don't quite have the syntax down, just make sure that you work on that, so if it comes up in subsequent exams, you can get it fully correct. Okay. Okay, so add initial data. What I did is I made it so that you insert the ID value, and that's going to make it easier, okay, to make sure that when I insert into sales that I have the correct ID values. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Common mistakes would be things like the numeric fields putting quotes around it, okay, which is not correct, or forgetting to put quotes around some text field. Okay, so that was the most common mistakes that I saw there. Most people did a pretty good job with that. A few people didn't insert the ID, but then based on the order that they inserted the books and then inserted customers, I looked at their sales inserts and they were all correct. So at least the ones that did that. Okay, so that wasn't a big problem. Okay, customers, same thing. The only problem I saw was some people forgot to put single quotes around the text data, but most people did, so that wasn't a big problem at all. Then I insert into sales, book ID, customer ID. For some reason, majority of people put customer ID and then book ID, so the numbers they have there are all flipped from the way that I have it listed, but they're all equivalent. And I checked it, and most people didn't have any problem with that. So in general, this part, the add initial data.sql, most people did very well in that part. Maybe they missed a few points because they either had quotes or they didn't have quotes when they were supposed to have those things. Okay. And then the add view. Okay, this one, I gave a little bit of leeway on this. If you look actually at the data, you really are supposed to include the customers.id field and books.id field. When you do that, you need to put them in as aliases because both are ID. Okay, so that was something that several people missed like that. In fact. Oh, okay. In fact, I just thought of something. If you got some points taken off for it says you didn't put in an alias for those, bring the paper back to me in a class, because then I shouldn't take off points for that, because I didn't take off points if people even left off the ID field. So that's ridiculous to take off points for somebody who put those in but didn't put in the alias. So if that happened to you, you see something like supposed to use an alias or something, then bring it back to me after class is over, and then I'll give you those points back. I think I took off half a point, but you shouldn't have lost that. All right, so you should have customers.id as some alias, customer's first name, last name, books ID as some alias, books title, books author, book price. Okay, you can start off with either the books table or the customers table, doesn't really matter. Okay, so I put from customers, join sales on the foreign key constraint, join with the third table, okay, on that foreign key constraint that's used to make that data match up. Some people had a real hard time with this. They weren't even close on this. Other people got pretty good. Some people got it basically correct, so that's good. So a real wide mixture. This will show up again on later exams. So if this was something that you had a real hard time with on the first exam, you're going to get other opportunities to show that you understand how the view works. Views are super important. Okay, and those of you that are going to go on to take CENT285, you're going to use them all the time, every single project. So definitely get used to those things. Okay, any questions on either the add initial data part or the add view portion? Okay. So there was just one last question. Based on the view you created, which some people didn't read the question super carefully, but based on the view you created, write the SQL command used to create the view of data. So it's supposed to be very simple. Select star from whatever the name of your view is. If I said just write the SQL commands that can generate that view, then you could maybe be excused for writing something like this, right, for that question. But it says based on the view, so all you got to do is just go select star from the view. Now, if you named each individual field, that would be okay, but then since you need all of the fields based upon the way the view was set up, then select star from sales view is the easiest way to do that. Even if your sales view was not set up correctly, but you tried to create it, if you put this down for the last answer, I gave you credit, okay? Because you at least had the right idea. Okay, any questions on the exam? All right, so for those of you who have never taken classes from me before, it probably is a little while before you get used to the kind of essay questions that I like to ask. Okay, so that's some adjustment that you can make for future exams. If the SQL syntax is not real clear in your head at this point, again, keep working at it, because when it shows up on subsequent exams, you'll do better on it just because you're more familiar with that. Okay, the class exam average was 75%, which is not too bad. Okay, so I'm okay with an exam average like that. If you don't like your exam average, well then you can come talk to me if you're not sure how to improve. What you need to pay attention to at this point mostly is that there's a little piece of paper attached to the front of your exam. To the right of your name, it says overall, and that's what you're averaging right now. So if I gave the grade today, that would determine what your grade would be. The other part that's important is at the very bottom of that, it says overall grade determined, and it says 12%. That means that there's 88% of the grade yet to be determined, right? So it's pretty early in the semester. So two things about that. One, if you're doing very good, it's not time to just relax and say, I got it made in this class, because it's still almost 90% of the grade left. Okay, two, if you're not doing that well, you have time to start doing better to bring up your average. You have a significant amount of time, but you got to get moving. Okay, so if you had a real hard time and you have no idea how to do better on subsequent exams, you should come and talk to me. Okay, any questions? All right, so the second thing is I'm going to introduce Project 1. We are not going to get into it big time because I want you folks to complete Lab 4, okay? Because I'd like for Lab 4 to be turned in by today. If you turn it in by today, then you won't have any late penalty. You turn it in after today, then there'll be a late penalty depending on how late you turn it in. Okay, but let me talk about Project 1, and then the rest of the time after that, I'll give you folks to work on Lab 4. If you already turned in Lab 4, then basically you're done for today. Okay. All right, so let's look at this. The handout was up in front, but this is exactly the same thing here. Okay, so you're going to create a web interface, which is one of the things you do all the time if you take CENT285. Okay. And it'll allow a user to log in by supplying a correct username and password. We're going to talk about some of the things that are very important for CENT285 that you would play actually a large role in the kind of grade you get for CENT285. And by the way, I should put in a plug for it for CENT285. It's not clear when we're going to offer that again. So currently it's not offered for the fall semester. If some people need that because they absolutely need it for some reason, although I don't think the CENT curriculum is set up that way, but it's not currently going to be offered for fall. However, if a bunch of people go to the CENT department and request it, then there's going to be a way to add it in. And CENT285 is about web security. It used to be primarily web programming, but now it's more web security using web programming. And people that understand basic network security for the most part, one of the components that's missing is web security, because the web pages, if you have a web server on your network server, that's basically the front end. Okay, so unless you understand something about web security, you don't even know if the people who are doing the web programming and putting it on your server, if what they're setting up is correct or not. Okay, so it's not necessarily that you have to be able to write web programs that are basically secure. You need to be able to identify if somebody's putting stuff on there that basically is going to run you into trouble. And it's very, very, very different. We have people who work in network administration and the IT side that don't understand web security. Okay, so one of them set up a server for PCAT several years ago. With one week later, was totally compromised. Okay, so basically, and that was a person who'd been working here over 20 years, basic network security. Okay, and even was responsible for when there was some really big attacks on the various networks across the UH system, made it possible for HCC to be the only campus that wasn't hit when almost every other campus got hit by some viruses. Okay? That same person basically didn't know how to set up something with a web server on it, and like I said, 1 week later totally compromised the server. They had to just rebuild it from scratch. Okay, so it can be important if you're going to go onto that side. Understanding something about web security is very important for all kinds of security. So it's something that I would encourage those of you that have the time to take it when they offer it to take it. It's a good course. Okay, so some of the kind of things that you would be doing would be similar to this project. Okay, way more involved. This is actually a relatively simple thing compared to the projects you do for that class, but it gives you some idea for what's going on. Okay, so here you're going to have something that handles login. So that means you got to set up a place where there's boxes where they can enter the username and password, hit a OK button or submit button. It performs authentication. If the person enters the correct username and the password that goes with that username, then you go to the next page. Otherwise, it stays on the login page. You cannot get past the login page. That's a basic way that it's going to work. Okay. We're going to use PHP. Years ago, we used to teach CENT285 using Rails, okay, Ruby on Rails, and we also used to use Google Web Toolkit. Okay, both of those things proved to be too difficult for the average student, so we got away from that. But the bonus or the advantage of going away from that is with PHP, you have direct control over the web security. Whereas if you use Ruby on Rails, it has some built-in stuff which you basically, whether it works or not, it doesn't depend on you, right? It depends on the developers for Rails. That's why you see a lot of bizarre stuff going on with Rails where people have to specify not just the version of Rails, but the specific patch number for Rails for their application. Which is why people really hate to have to host Rails, because they got to pay attention to not just the version, but the patch number, which is also why in Hawaii, where they like to use Rails for some reason, almost everybody hosts it on Heroku, because then Heroku has to take care of the configuration side of it for them. Yeah? So they don't need to put resources into maintaining just the server side. Okay, but anyway, PHP is a lot better with respect to web security. Lot more straightforward. You have full control, so you can see exactly what needs to be done. When I teach that course, it makes it super easy for me to check whether the project has been built correctly or not. You know, within 2 or 3 minutes, I can tell if it has security holes. Okay, so, and by the way, somebody that's trying to break into that kind of stuff can find it even faster than I can. Okay, so it's that black and white. Yeah, it's either got holes that are easy to exploit, or it's protected from most reasonable type of situations. Okay, so anyway, we're going to look at that. We're going to have a PHP script. It has this basic format. Don't worry about that for now. Most of the PHP scripts, I'm going to help you develop them all. Okay, so it's not like you got to develop it from scratch, but it's a good idea to start looking at it. We'll look at the syntax of it. It's very similar to the syntax that you use for Java. Okay, so the ending of the line statement is a semicolon, so just like Java. You use curly braces to designate a block, just like Java. Okay, so it's similar to Java. You can use object-oriented programming in PHP, just like you can use object-oriented programming in Python, but you don't have to. Okay, so in general, PHP scripts tend to be less verbose than Java scripts, so that's actually a good thing. Okay, makes it easier. Now, why do they use PHP? PHP, in terms of actual web pages, for a scripting language, is used in more than 70% of the web pages worldwide. Okay. For some reason in Hawaii, they like to use Ruby on Rails as a scripting, okay, Rails as a scripting language. There's some places on the mainland where they use a full Java stack. Okay, so they use JSP, Java servlets, Tomcat server instead of an Apache server, that kind of stuff. But that's not a lot of places. And then if you go worldwide, it's like 70-something%. Now, some of that is because WordPress uses PHP and other kinds of frameworks like Drupal that's PHP based as well. A lot of people use Drupal for content management, okay, and then Manoa, for example. Okay, so that's PHP. Okay, so it's a very worthwhile language to learn. You can actually do general purpose scripting with PHP, but what it's really good for is that it can directly write to HTML markup. Okay, and that's really good for web pages. Okay, so it's really good for writing directly to web pages. That's why it's used. What are we going to use for this? We're going to use PostgreSQL, Apache, PHP. Of our Docker containers, one has PHP and Apache, and the other one has the PostgreSQL service, right? So that's why we have the two containers, because when you have the Apache service and then you have the PostgreSQL database server service, those should be in separate containers, because Docker containers should have basically one major service. And you can have a bunch of applications, but anything that is actually served out, okay, should be in a separate container. So this is one container, this is the other container. That's how it's set up. Okay, so there's going to be a bunch of files. Okay, login.php, handle login.php. Those things are not going to make a lot of sense now, but you can kind of guess. They have something to do with logging in the person. Okay, home.php, that's a landing page. So it's typical when you log in, so you put in your username and password, and it's correct, then it redirects to a landing page, and that's what the home.php is going to be. Okay, helpers.php is not a script that the user interacts with. Your programs will make use of that to support login. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Init.sql, okay, if you look, we don't have a lot of things going on in terms of SQL scripting for this first project. It's mainly PHP stuff, just getting used to a web interface. Now this line right here, if you look at your handout, because it may be hard to read, the files can be put into a compressed folder called project1.tar.gz. It can be a zip file, zip instead of gz. It doesn't have to be gzip, because if you create it on Windows, then the default form is going to be zip, and that's fine. So that doesn't matter, as long as it's compressed. If it's not compressed and you upload PHP files or any files that have PHP in the name up to Laulima, Laulima will clobber those files. So those files will not have any regular content. It'll just replace it with some HTML markup that basically says that, it gives some error message essentially. So the people who administer Laulima from UH Manoa recognize that PHP scripts can do damage if you just run them inadvertently, okay, or you let anybody run PHP stuff, and their stuff definitely can execute PHP, right? That's the basis of how they set up their servers. So they detect PHP anywhere in the name of a file and they're going to clobber it. So the way that you have to put up your PHP scripts is inside of a compressed folder that doesn't say anything PHP, and they're okay with that. And that's how you have to upload it. Otherwise, you can't receive proper credit for that project because I can't see your PHP files. Okay? What that means is when we're going over those assignments, I'm going to have to, when I create PHP scripts that I want you to have, I got to always remember to put them in a compressed folder and upload the compressed folder. And then so you got to be able to pull it down and extract it. Okay, and that's because of Laulima, the way that it works. Okay, now, here's stuff, I'm going to go over this again, but it's important to remember this. You need to explain how the passwords are stored. Okay? This is a security issue. Okay? You do not ever want to store passwords as clear text. Okay? So, if you've ever signed up for something and you say, oh, I forgot my password, so you click on something that says, I forgot my password, if they can email you your actual password, that means they're storing it via clear text. Okay, and then that's a really, really terrible security problem. Okay, does that happen often? Used to happen all the time. Okay, does it still happen? Yes, it does. Okay, so I have even refused to sign up for some services when basically the dead giveaways for stuff like this is if they limit your password to be a certain number of characters. There's no reason at all to ever do that if you store passwords in the right way. So if they say it cannot be more than so many characters, they're probably storing it as clear text, and they're using basically, instead of a text field, they're using basically a character field where it specifies this is, or variable character field where it says this is the maximum number of characters you can store. That's crazy. Okay, if you're actually hashing it properly. Okay, because when you hash it, the length of the hash is independent of the original text that was hashed. Yeah? So I can have a password that's 64 characters long, somebody else has one that's 12 characters long. When you hash it, the hash comes out about the same length. Okay? So it shouldn't depend on the length of the password itself. Okay, so you're going to need to explain about that. You're going to need to explain about how to set it up. So you say, you expand this file, you place these files into these folders and so forth, right? You go through and you got to run this script in order for this to work. And then finally, this is how, once the browser is pointing to the right place, this is how the program is set to run. Okay, now, hard to read this, you can see it, hard to read on the screen, but you can see it on a printout, or you can look at it on Laulima. But it says if the project sets up and runs without errors, that's 40 points out of 100. Okay? So the explanation of passwords is 30 points. Okay? So if you forget to explain about the passwords, then you can get no higher than 70 out of 100, which is a very bad score if all the rest of your stuff works. So this is very, very, very important. Okay? So if you put just one or two sentences here, or you figure out to do it, you're going to get a bad score for the project. So what you would want to do is, as we're going through the project, think of what kind of things are going to go into this explanation, right? So you do that ahead of time. You take notes as we're going along the way so you know the appropriate things to add, okay, for the explanation of how the passwords are stored, why they're stored that way. Okay, then another 30 points is a setup. Okay, so if you just put, again, one or two sentences saying this is how you set it up, you're not going to get a good score. There's a number of steps that are involved. Same thing, as we're going and doing the project, make sure you take notes so you can go give a full explanation of stuff here, okay, in order to get full points there. Okay, so I've seen people get like 50 points on the first project because their project works perfectly and they do a terrible job in these two explanations. Now, that's more than half of the points, those two explanations put together. So if you try to think of a good explanation and you start on that the night before the project is due, you probably won't get a good score for the project. If you start on those kind of things as we're working on the project, you'll probably get a good score for the project. No reason not to get a good score, but some people manage to do it by messing up in these two areas. Okay. All right. And when it's due March 13th by 10 p.m. Okay. So when you turn it in, you're going to just submit that gzip file or the zip file, the thing that has all the folders in it. And inside of here, you can have a Word document. Inside of those compressed folders, the Word document has the two explanations of those two areas. Okay? So I'm going to say it again. As we do the project, and we're not going to start on today, so you don't have to worry about it just for this session. Okay? As we work on it, you want to be taking notes so that you have full explanations for those two parts by the time you turn the project in. Okay? Otherwise, even if your project works perfectly, you won't get a good score. Okay? Now, most people do that because I warn people about it, but I also, to be fair, I have seen people get very low scores because their project worked correctly, but their explanations are lacking, okay, severely lacking in content, okay, and clarity. So make sure you think about those things. Okay, any questions then on the project? Okay, so at this point, not much to ask about the project because you don't see any of the details. That's okay. What I want to do is stop there so that you can go ahead and work on lab 4, okay, and then try to get that completed so that you can turn it in today.